everybody. Coming to you live from my bed today. Um, I'm not in my pajamas though. I am dressed. I'm going to take my kids for a walk after this. I went for a run this morning, but I think I messed up my knee. It was really tight. I just need to stretch it out more. But I hope people are staying sane, doing their thing. I'm sure you heard the news that we're now out till at least April 20th. I hope that's the last time that gets extended, but to be honest, it could go longer. Anyway, thank you for joining me here today. I'm going to talk through the 1941 chapter, which can be a really confusing chapter. I think both the last two chapters can be confusing to kind of just track where we are in time and what's happening. So, in addition to just giving you the answers to the quiz here, I also want to just kind of give you a recap of the chapter in general. So, it starts right after Sula's death, obviously, which was how 1940 died. And unsurprisingly, the town is sort of relieved, even happy, maybe even joyous at the news that Sula has passed. Because I think to the whole community, she was, a symbol of evil, frankly. And I think she was also somebody um, who they'd started to blame all their problems on, um, which is a thing that kind of comes up in this chapter as well. So it starts with them just talking about how so the two signs that Sula's death was a good thing were that they were finally going to hire black workers to work on the tunnel. They'd never hired anybody to work on the river road like they promised, but now they're building this tunnel, and the hope is that they'll do that. And then the other thing is that they do sort of build a new old people's home, as Morrison puts it on page 151, and sort of like an irony in the fact that that comes right after Sula's death, so that Eva actually ends up in a better place after Sula's gone too. Is in like an interesting bit of irony, lots and lots and lots of irony. But then on page 151, the weather gets pretty weird. In October, suddenly there's ice everywhere, which kind of messes up everything for a little bit. And then on page 151, we get some interesting stuff when we realize that one thing that's now happening, because this is in the middle of page 153, this is when Teapot's mother basically just like beats the crap out of him because he won't eat the like cinnamon toast that she's made for him. And it says she was not alone. Other mothers who had defended their children from Sula's malevolence, or who had defended their positions as mothers from Sula's scorn for the role, now had nothing to rub up against. The tension was gone, and so was the reason for the effort they had made. Without her mockery, affection for others sank into flaccid disrepair. Daughters who had complained bitterly about the responsibilities of taking care of their aged mothers-in-law had altered when Sula locked Eve away, and they began cleaning those old women's spittoons without a murmur. Now that Sula was dead and done with, they returned to a steeping resentment of the burdens of old people. The chapter goes on to give similar things. The point here is, when Sula was around, because they saw her as evil, everybody wanted to be not like her. So sort of like to spite her, they decided to be better wives, better granddaughters, better mothers, better all these things, because they felt like it was the opposite of what Sula would do, and to show that they were better than Sula. But now that Sula's gone, they no longer have sort of like that chip on their shoulder, and they're just like, eh. So in an interesting way, you could argue that Sula's presence actually made the town a better place. And part of that is they just had somebody to blame for the bad things happening. And they had somebody by which to measure themselves. Like, I'm not going to be like her because she's the worst. And now that she's gone, they don't have that anymore. And they just kind of go back to their old ways. So in a weird way, you could argue that Sula actually made the town better. And now that she's gone, it's kind of fallen apart a little bit. So that's the thing that happens in this chapter. The other interesting thing, the most interesting thing that you get here, I think, is the bit about Shadrach. Um, so we find out that he, first of all, we know like the weather gets better right around National Suicide Day. But then we get this chapter about him, not this chapter, but like this little bit of the chapter that's really all about him. Um, that I think is like a really interesting part of the book. Um, there's a part in here, part of this made me think of in there was a discussion a couple weeks ago. Um, I think it was when we were doing a close reading of the chapter, but Darius made the argument that the reason Shadrach's house was so clean was just because he was in the military. Darius, Toni Morrison agrees with you. Uh, she says at the top of page 156, he sometimes fell asleep before he got drunk, sometimes spent whole days looking at the river and the sky, and more he relinquished the military habits of cleanliness in his shack. Good call, Darius, back there a couple weeks ago. Anyway, one of the reasons for this, though, is he finds out that Sula has died. And he finds that out um, when he sees her dead body. Um, and now I'm trying to, like, I know this happens, and I'm like, where is this? Why am I not finding this? But that's the thing that happens. Um, we also find out that Sula's belt has been in his cabin the whole time, and it's been there as like a reminder of the one person who ever visited him, which means the last time that someone visited Shadrach's house was 1922, because that was the chapter in which Sula ran over to Shadrach's house. Um, that's a thing that we find out. We also find out what Shadrach meant when he said always. Um, so if you look top page 157, but when he looked at her face, he had seen also the skull beneath, and thinking she saw it too, knew it was there and was afraid. He tried to think of something to say to comfort her, something to stop the hurt from spilling out of her eyes. So he had said always. So she would not have to be afraid of the change, the falling away of skin, the drip and slide of blood, and the exposure of bone underneath. He had said always to convince her, assure her of her permanency. So his idea was just like, you'll always be here. You will always exist, is kind of what he's saying. Um, which is interesting because I think we also find out in this chapter that basically like Shadrach didn't see anything that day. He didn't see anything. He didn't know what she'd done to Chicken Little. Um, so there's a lot of interesting things here. Oh, here's the part where he sees um, Sula's body. So in the hallway, this bottom page 157, in the hallway, he passed an open door leading to a small room. She lay on a table there. It was surely the same one, the same little girl face, same tadpole over the eye. So he had been wrong, terribly wrong. No always at all. Another dying away of someone whose face he knew. And that's the interesting thing, because I think for Shadrach, the like turn away from who he's been, a big part of that is finding out that Sula has died, somebody who he promised would always be there, and somebody, the only person who's ever visited him in his house. Like she's carried all of this sort of like symbolic weight for him for all these years, and now he sees that she's gone, and it's like it. Um, and that's why he's like, he decides in this chapter, this is the last National Suicide Day I'll ever do. This is it. It's over after this. So then the big thing, and that's this one here. So what did he mean? He wanted to comfort her and assure her of her own permanency. It's answer C there. So then the end of the chapter is where things I think get confusing because there's so much action that happens. So I just kind of want to walk through what happens. Because the weather's been so bad for a while and people have been dealing with just lots of horrible things, when it starts to get warm around the first of the year, which carries out through the third of the year, which is always the day of National Suicide Day, I think the town kind of sees Shadrach marching through the town, and the Deweys are with him, and they're doing their ridiculous thing, and they're just so happy to get out and that the weather has turned, that basically what happens is like a parade of people behind Shadrach going through the town. So where in the past it was probably just like him and the Deweys and Tar Baby kind of seem to be the only people who have regularly been there. Now it's like the whole town is like, let's do this, let's celebrate. Which again is like ironic that when Shadrach's heart isn't in it and he's like, I'm done with this, finally everybody else gets behind it. So as they go through town, people see them, and more people kind of join in line And again, there's like an irony of this, like these people joyously celebrating death, basically, or the concept of death. Um, there's an interesting moment on page 160 where it says some, of course, like Helene Wright, would not go. That's the first mention we've gotten of Nell's mom in a long time there on page 160. But I think it's interesting to know, like, she wouldn't ever. She's too good for this thing. Anyway, they keep going and going, and it's just this crazy thing that's happening. And then they kind of stop and they see this area all fenced off where they're going to build, where they're planning to build the tunnel. Page 161, at the mouth of the tunnel excavation, in a fever pitch of excitement and joy, they saw the timber, the bricks, the steel ribs, and the tacky wire gate that glittered underneath ice struck to diamond in the sun. It dazzled them at first, and they were suddenly quiet. Their hooded eyes swept over the place where their hopes had lain since 1927. There was the promise, leaf dead, the teeth unrepaired, the coal credit cut off, the chest pains unattended, the school shoes unbought, the rush-stuffed mattresses, the broken toilets, the leaning porches, the slurred remarks, and the staggering childish malevolence of their employers, all there in blazing sunlit ice rapidly becoming water. So they see this, all this equipment that's there so they can dig the hole, and they think about all of the promises that have been made to them. All the money they should have made doing the work that should have been theirs to come through, and all the things they would have spent that on. And in the meantime, it's like all covered in ice, but the ice is starting to melt. Like antelopes, they leaped over the little gate, a wire barricade that never intended to bar anything but dogs, rabbits, and stray children. And led by the tough, the enraged, and the young, they picked up the lengths of the timber and the thin steel ribs and smashed the bricks they would never fire in yawning kilns, split the sacks of limestone they had not mixed or even been allowed to haul, tore the wire mesh, tipped over wheelbarrows, and rolled 4 poles down the bank where they sailed far out into the icebound river. Old and young, women and children, lame and hardy, they killed as best they could the tunnel they were forbidden to build. So that's what happened. So that's like, they're just like, going kind of crazy and destroying all this equipment, all the materials that were going to be used for the tunnel. They didn't mean to go and actually to go down into the lip of the tunnel, but in their need to kill it all of it, to wipe from the face of the earth the work of the thin-armed Virginia boys, the bull-necked Greeks, and the knife-faced men who waved the leaf-dead promise, they went too far, too deep. And there's an ellipse, because Morrison kind of cuts off there. A lot of them died there. The earth, now warm, shifted. The first 4 pole slipped. Loose rock fell from the face of the tunnel and caused a shield to give away. They found themselves in a chamber of water. I will come downstairs. Do you want to say hi to my students real quick? I'm finishing one quick video for them. Do you want to say hi? You don't want to say hi? Hi. Okay. Give me 2 minutes and I will be downstairs and I will come see what you made, okay? We can maybe go for a walk in a little bit. Sound like a plan? It's life right now. What happens, though, is it's right by the river and this tunnel's going through and everything just kind of gives way because as it melts, you know how like dirt gets like soft as it melts and just gives way. And they all end up getting washed away in the water. Not all of them, but quite a few of them. Tar Baby, Desi, Ivy, Valentine, the Herod boys, some of Ajax's younger brothers, and the Deweys, at least it was supposed, their bodies were never found, all died there. Which means the last answer here is Shadrach. Only person who did not die there. Let me look at your questions here, see if there are any questions here. I'll answer those real quickly. And then, as you just heard me promise my son, I'm going to go for a walk. I can't choose 2 options for the 2-option question, but I'm confused with what Shadrach meant with permanency. Why does he think this would be comforting for Sula? What does Morrison mean by leaf dead promises? Why did Shadrach stood there in while everyone else was dying? It's a lot of questions. You couldn't pick more than one? Oh, that sucks. You'll probably get it right whether you choose even just one of them then. Why does he think this would be comforting for Sula? Well, I think he just sees somebody. I think for him that was comforting, right? I think when he was dealing with what he was dealing with after the war, it was that like seeing himself in the toilet water, knowing he was a person, somebody who was real. That is what comforted him. So I think this idea of like, you are real, you are here, you are always here. He's thinking that that's going to help her. But I think it's just him reflecting on what helped him in that moment. What does Porson mean by leaf dead promise? I think that metaphor is meant to, like when a leaf, there's a leaf on a branch, and that's like a promising thing, right? It's like spring has come, but then that leaf eventually dies and falls down, and it's just a shell of what it was. I think that's kind of what the promise was to them. It was once that leaf on the tree, that thing that they were excited about, and now it's the thing that crunches underneath their foot on a fall day. It's nothing to them. Why did Shadrach stand there in the end while everyone else is dying? I mean, what was he going to do? I don't think this was not a situation from which he was going to be able to save somebody. This is like a tunnel caving in, water coming through. Like, there's really nothing that anybody could have done to save anybody in that moment. At the same time, I mean, isn't this kind of the spirit of the day? People finally, for him, it's also like he set aside a day where death could happen, and death is happening. It's exactly kind of what I don't think he wanted to kill people or want it to be happen accidentally, but if there's a day on which death is supposed to happen, it's this day for him. So who's he to get in there? I'm taking the test on my phone relay, but for a question on the answers. Okay, sorry. Can you please explain to me how everyone in the bottom died? I was so confused because it felt like it happened so fast. I think I just tried to explain that, but again, the tunnel kind of collapses. They end up getting carried down into the river that's right next to the tunnel. There's probably water coming through the tunnel, because I don't know if on the other side of the tunnel is some water too, but bad business. But basically the ground gives way, the tunnel collapses, people are carried away under the river, they die. It was first mentioned Shadrach does not want to go necessarily. Why does he end up going, and why does everyone die except him? I think I got the dying part. I think he goes because it's just like, it's what he does, right? And everybody expects him. I don't know if everybody expects him to do it, but I think for him, it's just like part of that normalcy of what he does. And I think he just says, like, this is the last time I'm doing that. Like when you decide you're going to stop a thing, but often you're like, one more time and that's it. I think that's what he's there. Is hypocrisy a theme that is developed in the town because people changed based on what Sula did? Yeah, I think people are definitely big, giant hypocrites in this town for the way that they judge Sula and for the way that they blame Sula for all of their problems, when in the end, who was causing the problems in their lives? They were. But Sula, I think, is the easy person to blame things on. Why was everyone laughing? I think they were laughing because it was a warm January day. They'd been through like one of the worst winters ever, and they were just happy to finally be outside in a warm day. And I think there's something about National Suicide Day that probably also just felt like kind of ridiculous and funny to people. Then, of course, there's the irony of everybody finally dies on that one. Why is the community of Bottom regard Sula's death as a good omen? I think because they regarded her coming as a bad omen. So I think they're just thinking like they've blamed every bad thing that's happened since she came back on her, even if she had nothing to do with it. So I think now that she's gone, they think that things are going to get better, even though, like, as we find out when they really think about it, like, things weren't that great before to begin with. They just finally had somebody to blame their problems on. Now that she's gone, they think things will be better, but really what happens is now they've lost that person to blame their problems on. I don't quite understand the whole meaning behind Shadrach telling Sula always. I think I've explained that. If people have more questions about that, let me know. Sorry that you couldn't choose multiple options on the quiz. I'll get better at this as we keep doing this, since we now find out we're doing this through April. Could you summarize how everyone died? I think I did that. Why did people who joined Shadrach want to destroy the tunnel? I think I answered that question already. If you got more questions, or if anything I said was confusing, please leave more comments below and I will get to those. But I just promised a 6-year-old I'd take him for a walk, so I'm going to go do that. I'm not going to post some of these videos till Monday. So you got the whole weekend to take the 1965 quiz. Once this video is posted, the 1941 quiz is down. And that's that. It looks like even if you just chose one answer for that first question, it gave it to you. It will have given you the points for it. So don't worry too much about that. And I'll look at it to make sure everybody got the points they deserve. I will do my best to update grades from things this week over the weekend, putting in stuff for people who have done what they've done. If you got friends who are choosing not to do the work, please encourage them to do so. It's going to be a while before we get back to school. And when we get back, it's going to be bang, 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 trying to get things done. So I promise you, if you do this work, when we get back, it won't be crazy. But if you're not doing this work, in which case you're probably also watching this video, so tell your friends who have chosen not to do work. Life is going to be really hard when we do finally come back if you're not doing this work. I guess that's assuming we do come back. Who knows, guys? Who knows? Anyway, thanks for being here. Thanks for being awesome. I'm going to post some other videos later today. Stay sane out there, guys. I miss you guys. Later.